It's easy to forget where it all began. Before the gold statues, the Emmy records, and the unforgettable one-liners, there was a young girl from Des Moines with nothing but grit, a vivid imagination, and a voice that refused to stay quiet. Born into the shadows of the Great Depression, Chloris Leachman found light on the stage, chasing a feeling that would stay with her for nearly a century. Back then, things were simpler and harder. Fame wasn't a goal. Survival was. Yet somehow, her path kept unfolding, from local plays to a near miss at Miss America, each moment nudging her closer to something extraordinary. She didn't arrive in Hollywood polished. She came unpredictable, electric, with edges that refused to smooth. Some tried to box her in. She laughed and broke the mold instead. Behind every laugh she delivered, there was history. Behind every role, a memory etched in time. Not all of them were easy. Not all of them were kind. But every one of them mattered. And long before the world called her brilliant, she had already decided never to be ordinary. Chloris Leachman's story didn't unfold in a straight line. It expanded in waves, shaped by risk, resilience, and a deep hunger to perform. After leaving Iowa behind, she sharpened her craft alongside names like Paul Lynde and Charlton Heston, each rehearsal feeding a quiet determination that would carry her through decades of reinvention. The move to New York placed her under the guidance of Elia Kazan, where she stripped back pretense and leaned into vulnerability. Her early years were a blur of stage plays, minor film roles, and persistent effort, the kind that doesn't headline but builds legacies. Then came 1971. In the Last Picture Show, she didn't just act. She revealed something raw. Ruth Popper's loneliness struck a chord, and the Academy took notice. That golden statue didn't signal arrival. It signaled transformation. From there, her world widened. Mel Brooks brought out her chaotic brilliance, the crackling mischief of Frau Blucher, the unsettling delight of Nurse Diesel. Audiences laughed, but they also stared, unsure whether to lean in or look away. Chloris made them feel something different every time. Television welcomed her with open arms, and made space for Phyllis Lindstrom, a character both ridiculous and touching, selfish and endearing. Emmy after Emmy followed, 8 in total, proof of a range that never bent to expectations. Even age didn't slow her. In her 80s, she joined Dancing with the Stars, not as a novelty, but as a reminder. She was still here, still fearless, still impossible to ignore. She voiced creatures, played grandmothers with bite, and kept the fire burning long past the point others faded. Behind the spotlight, her personal life unfolded in quiet complexity. Her marriage to George England wove her further into Hollywood's inner fabric, a connection that brought both creative collaboration and private heartbreak. The loss of her son Brian at just 30 cut deep, a wound she carried even while making millions laugh. And yet, she never hid from grief. Like everything else, she wore it without apology. For a time, their home was tucked into a hillside in Los Angeles, a neighborhood glittering with legends. Judy Garland lived next door. Chloris, always the watcher and the listener, became a gentle presence in the lives of Garland's children. Not a savior, but a steady hand in a home that often shook. Those moments didn't make headlines, but they mattered. Throughout it all, a quiet tension followed her, the kind born not from scandal, but from contrast. She didn't fit easily into boxes. She wasn't sweet, or soft, or safe. Chloris was sharp, honest, unfiltered. And when the world tried to pick favorites, she never played along. Success never silenced the conflict. Beneath Chloris Leachman's celebrated career lived a tension that never quite eased, a rivalry that followed her through the decades, just out of view, quietly shaping the room she entered. Betty White, with her polished charm and ever-present smile, stood at the opposite end of the spectrum. Where Betty was warm, Chloris was sharp. Where Betty softened a room, Chloris cut through it. Their careers collided most famously on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, a series that gave them both platforms, but very different kinds of attention. Phyllis Lindstrom, played by Leachman, was unpredictable, vain, often absurd. She was beloved for it. Critics applauded her ability to steal a scene without softening a single edge. But when Betty White's Sue and Nivens arrived later in the series, the mood began to shift. Betty's character won quick adoration, charming audiences and critics alike. The industry took notice. The spotlight leaned her way. For Chloris, it wasn't jealousy, it was disillusionment. The applause didn't feel like recognition anymore. It felt like a shift in loyalty. What followed was years of simmering friction, Never loud enough to explode, but always loud enough to hear. Chloris, with her disarming honesty, never tried to hide it. In interviews, in speeches, in quiet jabs dressed up as jokes, she spoke her truth. She saw Betty not as a friend, but as a rival with a strategy. One that played to expectations and benefited from them. The media loved the contrast. Audiences ate it up. But for Chloris, it wasn't a show. It was personal. As Betty White's career stretched into internet superstardom, Chloris remained a figure of quiet brilliance, respected, but less celebrated. She joked about it, but the edge in her voice always lingered. She had earned more Emmys, played riskier roles, dared to be unlikable. And yet, the narrative favored the safe choice. Chloris's eccentricity became her signature, but it also made her harder to package, harder to sell. She knew it. She spoke about it. And in her own way, she wore it like armor. That contrast followed them into their final public appearances. Award stages, tributes, panels. Always the undercurrent of tension. Once, Chloris mocked Betty from the podium, calling her America's sweetheart, with a wink and a glare. The audience laughed, but the truth behind the line was impossible to ignore. That wasn't a punchline. It was a wound with years behind it. Chloris didn't want to be adored for being lovable. She wanted to be remembered for being real. Even in private, the divide remained. Betty was known for her consistency, her poise, her reliability. Chloris was erratic, bold, always a little dangerous to work with. Not because she was difficult, but because she was unpredictable. Producers and executives gravitated toward comfort. Chloris offered none. What she offered instead was honesty. Messy, unfiltered, and sometimes uncomfortable, but always honest. For Chloris, the applause never mattered as much as the work. The characters she brought to life were complicated, messy, human. She played women with edges. Women who were flawed, ridiculous, angry, hilarious, sometimes all in the same scene. That duality was her gift. But it also meant she was never quite embraced the way others were. Betty could walk onto a stage and be adored. Chloris had to fight for every inch of recognition. And even then, it came with caveats. As the years passed, that divide became more pronounced. Betty's public image grew lighter, brighter, safer. Chloris's legacy darkened, thickened with complexity. The world prefers its legends simple. Chloris never made that easy. She lived with sharp turns, unresolved rivalries, and a defiant refusal to soften her truth. And even as the spotlight drifted elsewhere, she remained fierce and unrelenting, not because she needed attention, but because she had something to say, and refused to let anyone else say it for her. Chloris Leachman lived the kind of life that never folded neatly into anyone's expectations. Even as time moved forward, she didn't slow down or shift to match the industry's softened edges. At 82, she danced in front of a national audience, not for nostalgia, but because she still had something to prove. She brought that same fire to every late career role, whether it was voicing an ancient cavewoman or stealing scenes as a chaotic grandmother. Audiences who thought they knew her discovered a version even more vibrant, more daring than before. She didn't fade, she evolved, stubbornly, hilariously, and with intention. Away from the lights, her story stayed layered. Her marriage to George England ended, but their shared history lingered in the shape of 5 children. Loss, especially the death of her son Brian, left a silence that no career milestone could ever fill. Yet she kept going. She turned grief into motion. She stayed close to the work, not because she needed the attention, but because the work gave her breath. The family she raised, the friendship she offered, even to the Garland children next door, reflected a quiet generosity that never made headlines but left deep impressions. The public rivalry with Betty White never truly resolved. It lived in tension, in small remarks, in sideways glances and award night jabs that walked the line between comedy and truth. Chloris never softened her opinions for approval. She never chased likability. And while Betty became a national treasure, Chloris stood in the shadows, brilliant and biting, unafraid to challenge the simplicity of legacy. Her work spoke louder than her press, and those who listened heard something few others dared to express. That brilliance can be messy, that truth can be unpolished. Her final years weren't marked by retreat, but by resilience. She worked, she joked, she stayed vivid. Then, on January 27, 2021, her story quietly ended. A stroke took her, complicated by the unseen weight of a pandemic that had touched so many. In Encinitas, California, her final chapter came not with headlines or spectacle, but peace. Her manager's words reflected what fans already knew, that Chloris had given everything. Not just talent but nerve. Not just range but truth. The confusion around her exact date of passing, whether it was the 26th or 27th, didn't dull the morning. It simply echoed the way she lived. Untidy, human, real. Her cremation took place in private, a farewell in keeping with her wishes. No grand farewell tour. No glossy send-off. Just a quiet goodbye among those who knew her best. Still, the tributes poured in. They weren't always loud, but they were lasting. Her scenes were replayed. Her sharpest lines resurfaced. Younger audiences discovered her. Older ones remembered. Social media filled with laughter, clips, stories, and the kind of love that reaches across generations. She didn't need to be the most adored. She had already become unforgettable. Networks honored her. Award shows made space for her memory. But it was in the hearts of fans, in the way her characters lingered, in the way her honesty cut through, that Chloris Leachman found permanence. Her absence reminded people of her presence. Not just as a performer but as a force. A woman who never backed down. A legend shaped not by smooth edges, but by the power of standing exactly as she was.